The great meeting hall on Nexus Prime stretched wider than most cities, its crystal walls reflecting the strange forms of hundreds of alien delegates. The air hummed with translator devices working overtime as dozens of species communicated in clicks, hisses, musical tones, and colors that shifted like living rainbows. At the center of this vast gathering stood a small group of humans, looking almost comically ordinary among the towering insectoids, flowing energy beings, and crystalline, rock creatures that surrounded them. Commander Jin Park adjusted his simple blue uniform and stepped forward to the speaking platform, his heart beating steadily despite the weight of countless alien eyes studying him. The human delegation was tiny compared to the massive entourages that accompanied other species. While the Serpentine Sectar brought 50 advisors with scales that glittered like jewels, and the gaseous Veilnari manifested as a small aurora of shifting lights, humanity had sent just 5 representatives from their distant blue world. Jin cleared his throat and began to speak, his words carried by translators to every corner of the enormous chamber. Honored delegates of the Galactic Confederation, I am Commander Jin Park, speaking for the human species of Earth. We come before you today to request full membership in this great alliance and to ask for your protection of our outer colonies. The response was immediate and devastating. A wave of sounds erupted from the alien assembly, chittering laughter from the insect-like Kreks, harmonic amusement from the crystal beings, and what could only be described as polite dismissal from the energy creatures. The noise grew until it echoed off the crystal walls like thunder. The massive Sectar ambassador, his serpentine body coiled in what humans had learned was their version of casual arrogance, raised his scaled head high above the platform. His forked tongue tasted the air as he spoke, his voice carrying the weight of millennia. The younglings from the small blue world speak of protection, he hissed, his words dripping with amusement. Your entire species has been traveling between stars for what? Barely 2 of your centuries. My people were building star roads when your sun was still forming from cosmic dust. A ripple of agreement moved through the assembly. The Veilnari, representative, pulsed with colors that their translators identified as condescending humor. We have studied your species, humans. Your fusion drives are quaint. Your quantum computers are like toys children might play with. You ask to stand among civilizations that have mastered dark matter and bend reality itself to our will. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, Jin's science officer, stepped forward with a portable display showing humanity's latest technological achievements. The holographic projections showed sleek human ships, powerful fusion reactors, and advanced medical technology that had allowed humans to spread across dozens of worlds in just 2 centuries. The alien delegates examined the display with the sort of polite interest adults might show a child's drawing. The insectoid Kreks ambassador's compound eyes glittered as he spoke in rapid clicks that the translator converted to words. Impressive for such a young race, the translation announced, though we should mention that our smallest civilian transports carry more firepower than your largest warships. The energy output of your entire home system could power one of our minor research stations for perhaps a month. More laughter echoed through the chamber. A floating creature that looked like living mercury spoke in musical tones that somehow conveyed deep amusement. They build their ships from metal and ceramic, like ancient artifacts in a museum. Do they not know that matter itself can be taught to obey more complex commands? Jin maintained his composure as the mockery continued. Delegate after delegate pointed out humanity's limitations, their slow ships, their primitive weapons, their laughably small populations spread across just a few dozen worlds. Some species had billions of worlds. Others had learned to build new stars when they needed more energy. The vote, when it finally came, surprised no one. Humanity was granted probationary membership in the Confederation, a token gesture that cost the great powers nothing. But the terms were harsh. Human worlds would receive no protection. Human ships would have no access to Confederation star, roads, or trading networks. And humanity would be assigned to the Rim territories, the dangerous frontier sectors where failed species went to struggle and eventually disappear. The Outer Rim has challenges that might help your species grow, explained the Sectar ambassador with what might have been kindness in his voice. If you survive a generation or two, perhaps we can revisit your application for full membership. As the Great Assembly dispersed, aliens returning to ships that dwarfed human vessels, Jin gathered his small delegation. The other humans showed no sign of disappointment or anger at their treatment. If anything, they seemed almost satisfied. Walking to their modest transport ship, Dr. Tanaka spoke quietly to Jin. The performance was perfect. They believe exactly what we wanted them to believe. Jin nodded as he activated a secured communication channel back to Earth. His message was brief and coded. Package delivered successfully. The galaxy sees us as children. Phase 1 is complete. Behind them, the great powers of the galaxy continued their ancient games of politics and power, never suspecting that the small blue world's representatives had just accomplished exactly what they had come to do. Humanity had been dismissed, ignored, and assigned to the forgotten edges of known space. It was precisely where they wanted to be. 18 months had passed since the mockery at Nexus Prime, and Lieutenant Minho Kim was working the night shift at the Deep Space Monitoring Station orbiting Kepler's Gate. The station was a joint human-alien facility, one of the few places where humanity was allowed to contribute to Confederation defense networks, though mostly they were given the boring jobs like watching empty space. Minho sipped his coffee and stared at the sensor displays, expecting another quiet night of monitoring cosmic background radiation and logging the occasional merchant vessel passing through the gate. The massive ring structure of Kepler's Gate hummed quietly nearby, its alien technology creating a shortcut through space that connected dozens of star systems. Then his screens began showing readings that made no sense. At first, Minho thought the sensors were broken. The displays showed massive objects approaching from the direction of the galactic void, the empty space between galaxies where nothing should exist. But these weren't just large objects. They were structures the size of planets, moving in perfect formation through space. "Commander Lee," Minho called to his superior, his voice tight with concern. "You need to see this right away." Commander Li Huan floated over in the low gravity of the station, his expression changing from mild irritation to shock as he saw the readings. Behind the approaching objects, the sensors showed something even more disturbing. Empty space stretching for thousands of light years where star charts indicated entire solar systems should exist. "Run a full diagnostic on all sensors," Lee ordered, his hands moving quickly over the control panels. "This has to be some kind of equipment failure." But the diagnostics came back clean. The sensors were working perfectly. What they were detecting was real, and it was heading straight for Confederation space at speeds that should have been impossible for objects so massive. Lee activated the emergency communication system, sending priority alerts to every Confederation world within 100 light years. Within minutes, responses began flooding in from alien commanders, whose voices carried fear that transcended species barriers. Confirmed, came a transmission from a Zephyrian bioship captain. Long-range sensors detect the same formations. Analysis suggests artificial construction. A Kethtar crystal ship added its harmonic voice to the growing chorus of alarm. Energy signatures match historical records from the Forbidden Archives. These are the Devourers. The name sent ice through the veins of every being who heard it. The Devourers were legend, a nightmare from the galaxy's ancient past. They were a machine intelligence that had consumed entire galaxies, turning all matter into more of themselves, leaving only empty void behind. Most species had believed them to be myth, stories told to frighten young ones. But the historical records were clear, buried in the deepest archives of the oldest civilizations. The Devourers had come before, billions of years ago, and only the combined might of countless species had barely managed to drive them back into the void between galaxies. Fleet Admiral Nara Takeshi received the alert aboard the human cruiser, Defiance, as she patrolled the Outer Rim territories where humanity had been assigned. Her ship was small compared to the alien vessels around her, but it was fast and well-armed by human standards. Within hours, the greatest military mobilization in galactic history was underway. Ships began arriving at Kepler's Gate from across the Confederation, Not just dozens or hundreds, but millions of vessels representing every species and every type of warfare technology the galaxy possessed. Nara watched through her ship's viewing ports as the alien armadas took formation. The Zephyrian bioships were beautiful and terrible, their living hulls writhing through space like enormous sea creatures swimming through an ocean of stars. Some were the size of cities, their organic weapons capable of breaking apart planets. The Nori, Kethtar brought their crystal dreadnoughts, ships that looked like massive gems but hummed with barely contained energy that could tear holes in space itself. Their weapons could destroy matter at the atomic level, reducing enemy ships to fundamental particles. The insectoid hive arrived with swarms of fighter craft that moved like flocks of metal birds, their collective intelligence allowing them to fight as a single organism. Millions of small ships could overwhelm any defense through sheer numbers and perfect coordination. The machine empire contributed vessels that could change their shape and function in real time, becoming whatever weapon was needed for each moment of battle. They brought ships that could repair themselves and others that could build new weapons from space debris. Even the peaceful species sent their most advanced technology. Energy beings provided power amplifiers that could boost weapon systems beyond their normal limits. The Crystal Singers contributed their reality-shaping abilities, capable of changing the laws of physics in localized areas. When the Devourers finally arrived at Kepler's Gate, the assembled fleet was the most powerful military force the galaxy had ever created. Commanders from species that had been enemies for millennia worked together, sharing tactical data and coordinating attacks. The battle began with optimism. The Confederation forces had every advantage: numbers, diversity of weapons, tactical experience from countless wars, and the desperate courage of beings fighting for their entire galaxy. Then the Devourers began to adapt. Nara watched in growing horror as the machine intelligence systematically learned to counter every weapon, every tactic, every advantage the Confederation possessed. Zephyrian bioweapons were analyzed and neutralized within minutes. Kethtar energy weapons were absorbed and redirected back at their own ships. The swarm tactics of the Hive were predicted and countered before they could be executed. The shape-changing machine ships found their transformations anticipated and exploited. Even the reality-bending powers of the Crystal Singers were somehow understood and nullified. In less than 6 hours, the greatest fleet in galactic history was completely destroyed. The final transmission from Confederation Command was brief and desperate. All remaining ships retreat to core systems immediately. Outer Rim territories are designated acceptable losses. This includes all human colonies. Nara closed the communication channel and turned to her crew. "Send the signal," she said quietly. Captain Jisoo Nam stood on the bridge of the human command. Vessel Resilience, as the last of the fleeing Confederation ships, disappeared into hyperspace. The powerful alien warships that had been fighting beside her just hours ago were now racing away as fast as their advanced engines could carry them, abandoning the Outer Rim territories to the approaching Devourers. The communication console still displayed the final message from Confederation High Command: human colonies designated acceptable losses. All Confederation forces withdraw to core systems immediately. Good luck. Jisoo's crew looked to her with mixed expressions of fear and determination. They had all known this moment might come eventually. Every human in the fleet had been trained for it, though many had hoped it would never be necessary. "Ma'am," said Lieutenant Daiki Suzuki from the communication station, "we're receiving retreat orders from Earth Command as well. They want all human ships to fall back to the Sol system." Jisoo nodded slowly, then walked to the secure communication panel that only ship captains were authorized to use. Her fingers moved over controls that hadn't been touched in decades, entering codes that had been passed down through generations of human commanders. "Send the Lazarus signal," she said quietly. "Authentication code 77 Omega." The message that left the Resilience was brief, but it traveled through hidden networks that had been waiting in silence for 800 years. Relay stations buried in asteroid fields, ocean trenches, and polar ice caps across dozens of worlds suddenly came to life, passing the ancient signal from system to system. On Earth, Dr. Jiho Sato was working late in his laboratory beneath the Mariana Research Station when alarms he had never heard before began to sound. Emergency lights cast red shadows on the walls as blast doors that had been sealed for centuries began to groan open with the sound of metal grinding against metal. "This is impossible," Jiho whispered as he watched massive chambers reveal themselves beyond the doors. The official record showed that the deep ocean facility had been built only 50 years ago to study marine life. But the chambers opening before him were clearly far older, their walls covered in symbols that looked almost human, but followed mathematical principles he didn't recognize. Similar scenes were playing out across human space. On Luna, mining engineer, Sora Ito watched in amazement as sections of the moon's surface split apart like opening flowers, revealing structures that definitely hadn't been there during the last geological survey. The metal walls that emerged were black as space itself, and covered in patterns that seemed to shift when she wasn't looking directly at them. On Mars, terraforming specialist Rina Yoshida received emergency orders to evacuate the northern polar region immediately. As her transport lifted off, she saw the ice fields cracking and shifting, exposing what looked like the tops of enormous buildings that stretched deep into the planet's core. "Control, this is Yoshida," she radioed back to Mars Central. "The structure's under the ice. How long have they been there?" The reply came after a long pause. "According to the files being declassified right now, about 800 years. Maybe longer." On Titan, Captain Junho Park stood in the observation dome of the orbital station as Saturn's largest moon underwent a transformation that defied everything he thought he knew about human history. The surface installations that were supposed to be simple fuel refineries were revealing themselves to be massive shipyards, their hidden sections rising from beneath the methane lakes like ancient sea monsters surfacing for air. Young Lieutenant Misaki Abe was stationed on Kepler 442b, a world that human colonists had supposedly discovered and settled just 30 years ago. She watched through her binoculars as the planet's polar ice caps cracked open, revealing structures that made the largest human cities look like small towns. "Lieutenant," called her commanding officer, Commander Yuki Tanaka, "run a deep geological scan on those structures." The results made Misaki's hands shake as she read them. "Sir, the carbon dating shows these buildings are at least 1,000 years old, but humans only developed space travel 2 centuries ago. This doesn't make sense." Commander Tanaka smiled grimly as he watched more sections of the ancient facility come online. "It makes perfect sense, Lieutenant. We just weren't told the whole truth about our history." Across human space, the same revelations were occurring. Every human colony, every mining station, every research outpost was revealing hidden depths that had been waiting beneath the surface. What the galaxy believed to be humanity's recent expansion into space was actually the awakening of installations that had been prepared centuries before humans were supposed to have left Earth. The most shocking discovery came from the deep space monitoring stations themselves. The equipment that humans had been using to watch for threats wasn't just advanced for a young species. It was more sophisticated than anything the Confederation possessed. The alien delegates who had laughed at human technology had never seen humanity's real capabilities. On Earth, ancient computers that had been sleeping since before recorded history began calculating firing solutions for weapons that shouldn't exist. Hidden factories started producing materials that current human science claimed was impossible to create. Power sources that had been dormant for nearly a millennium began charging systems that could reshape matter at the molecular level. The truth was becoming clear to those with the security clearance to access the newly declassified files. Humanity's expansion into space hadn't been the journey of a young species reaching for the stars. It had been a carefully planned return to positions that had been abandoned long ago, a strategic repositioning that had taken centuries to complete. Every human world sat at perfect tactical locations. Every trade route established advantages for military operations that had been planned before most alien species knew humans existed. Every archaeological discovery of unknown ruins on human worlds suddenly made sense. They had been human ruins all along. The galaxy had laughed at humanity's primitive technology and young civilization. They had no idea they were looking at the carefully maintained disguise of something far older and infinitely more dangerous. Deep in the hidden shipyards, ancient vessels began to stir. Captain Jun-Ho Park stood at the observation window of Titan station as the methane lakes below began to drain away like water going down an enormous bathtub. What emerged from beneath the surface made him question everything he thought he knew about human history. The ships that rose from their hidden berths were not like anything in the current human fleet. They were massive beyond comprehension, stretching for kilometers in length, their hulls so black they seemed to absorb light itself. Strange symbols covered their surfaces, not quite human writing but not alien either. The mathematical formulas etched into the metal seemed to shift and change as he watched, as if the ships themselves were thinking. "Status report," called Admiral Yoonji Kwan as she entered the command center. Her voice was calm, but Park could see the amazement in her eyes. She had been briefed about the Lazarus protocol, but seeing it activated was something else entirely. "First wave of ships coming online now," reported Commander Rina Yoshida from her station. "The Prometheus-class dreadnoughts are running full system checks. Power levels are, well, they're off our measurement scales." Through the observation windows, they could see the first of the ancient warships fully emerging from its berth. The Eternal Dawn was the size of a small city, its weapon systems completely unlike anything in current human military doctrine. Where modern human ships carried fusion torpedoes and plasma cannons, the Eternal Dawn had weapons that seemed to bend space around them. "Ma'am," called Lieutenant Misaki Abe from the communication station, "we're receiving similar reports from all human worlds. The hidden shipyards are fully operational. Total fleet count is—" She paused, checking her numbers twice. "Over 10,000 vessels, all of them larger than our current flagship." Admiral Kwan nodded as she took command of humanity's true warfleet. Around her, the command crew consisted of humans who had trained their entire lives for this moment. Raised on stories they had been told were ancient legends rather than historical fact. On Mars, the polar shipyards revealed vessels that looked more like living creatures than machines. The Odyssey-class carriers were smooth and organic in design, their fighter bays opening like mouths filled with craft that didn't seem to follow normal laws of physics. Captain Sora Ito watched in fascination as the first fighters launched, moving through space like shadows with substance, bending light around them as they flew. "These aren't our designs," she whispered to her engineering officer. "I mean, they're human, but they're nothing like what we build now." "According to the technical manuals that just became available," replied the engineer, "these ships were built during what the files call the first expansion. Apparently, we've been in space a lot longer than anyone remembers. The most terrifying revelations came from the deep space installations. Captain Daiki Suzuki found himself in command of a Ragnarok-class siege ship called the Final Answer. The vessel was designed for one purpose, to ensure that no enemy could ever threaten humanity again. Its main weapon could crack planets in half, and its secondary systems could sterilize entire solar systems of all life. "Sir," said his weapons officer nervously, "the technical specifications say this ship was built to fight something called extinction-level threats. What kind of enemies were we expecting?" Suzuki studied the classified files that had been unlocked with the Lazarus protocol. The answer made his blood run cold. "Everything," he said quietly. "We built these ships to fight everything." As the ancient fleet assembled, the true scope of humanity's deception became clear. Every human colony world wasn't just strategically positioned. It was a carefully planned military base disguised as a civilian settlement. Every mining operation had been covering the construction of weapons platforms. Every research station had been monitoring and preparing for threats the rest of the galaxy didn't even know existed. Lieutenant Yuki Tanaka was analyzing the tactical data from her position aboard the reconnaissance ship Shadow when she made a discovery that changed everything. "Admiral," she reported over the communication system, "I've been studying the alien reaction to our fleet activation. They're calling us the first ones in their emergency communications." "The first ones?" Admiral Kwan asked. "Yes, ma'am. Apparently every major alien civilization has ancient ruins on their homeworlds, structures they've been studying for thousands of years, trying to understand who built them. The mathematical formulas on our ships match the symbols they found in those ruins." The implications hit everyone at once. The alien species who had laughed at humanity's primitive technology had been studying human artifacts for millennia without realizing it. Every archaeological discovery they prized, every piece of ancient technology they had tried to reverse engineer, every mystery from their own prehistoric past, it had all been left behind by humans. Dr. Jiho Sato, now coordinating the awakening. Process from Earth, accessed files that revealed the full truth. Humanity hadn't developed space travel 2 centuries ago. They had been traveling between stars for over 1,000 years, building and abandoning civilizations across the galaxy. The young human species that had applied for Confederation membership was actually the remnant of the galaxy's oldest spacefaring race. "We let them think we had forgotten," Admiral Kwan said as she stood on the bridge of the Eternal Dawn, watching her ancient fleet take formation. "We played the role of the primitive youngsters while we prepared for the day we would need to remember who we really are." The Devourers were approaching human space expecting to find a helpless young species cowering in fear. Instead, they would face the awakened might of the galaxy's true masters, a civilization that had been preparing for this exact moment for 800 years. The ancient human fleet moved into battle formation, their weapons charging with power that predated known physics. The Devourers arrived at the edge of human space expecting to find another helpless species cowering before their inevitable consumption. Their planet-sized ships moved in perfect formation, their adaptive intelligence already analyzing the small, blue world called Earth and preparing to add its resources to their endless hunger. Instead, they found something that made their ancient machine minds pause for the first time in eons. A battle line stretched across half the solar system. Ships that radiated power signatures beyond anything in their vast databases. The vessels weren't just large, they were impossibly advanced, their hulls inscribed with mathematical principles that the Devourers' reality processing systems couldn't decode. Admiral Yunji Kwan stood on the bridge of the Eternal Dawn, watching as enemy constructs the size of moons approached her fleet. Around her, tactical displays showed weapons coming online that shouldn't exist according to current galactic science. Her crew worked with quiet efficiency, their faces showing not fear, but grim determination. "All ships report ready for combat," announced Commander Rina Yoshida from the Fleet Coordination Station. "The Prometheus-class dreadnoughts are fully charged. Odyssey carriers have deployed their shadow fighters. The Ragnarok siege ships are, Admiral, their weapons are reading power levels that our instruments can't measure." Through the viewing ports, they could see the approaching Devourers, massive geometric shapes that seemed to absorb starlight, their surfaces crawling with the machinery of consumption. These were the machines that had destroyed the greatest fleet in galactic history just days ago, learning and adapting to every weapon fired at them. "Open all communication channels," Admiral Kwan commanded. "I want every species in the galaxy to hear this." Her voice carried across space as the 2 fleets closed the distance between them. On worlds throughout the Confederation, alien leaders who had fled to their core systems listened in stunned silence as the human admiral spoke. "We are humanity," she began, her words calm and clear. "You came to our galaxy expecting to devour young species that barely knew how to reach for the stars. You have consumed civilizations that knew only how to build and grow. But today you face something different. Today you face the galaxy's oldest children, and we remember how to fight wars that end species." The first Devourer construct launched, a weapon that had destroyed Confederation dreadnoughts in seconds, a beam of pure entropy that unmade matter at the quantum level. The Eternal Dawn didn't dodge or raise shields. Instead, reality seemed to bend around the ancient human flagship, and the entropy beam simply ceased to exist, as if the universe had decided it had never been fired. Captain Daiki Suzuki watched from the bridge of his Ragnarok-class ship as his weapons officer prepared to fire the main gun. "Target the largest construct," he ordered. "Let's show them what extinction looks like." The weapon that fired wasn't energy or matter. It was something that edited reality itself. The massive Devourer ship didn't explode or break apart. It simply stopped existing, leaving behind empty space where moments before there had been a construct larger than most planets. On the Odyssey carrier Perseverance, Captain Sora Ito watched her shadow fighters engage the Devourer swarm craft. The enemy vessels tried to adapt to human tactics, but the shadow fighters weren't using conventional physics. They moved through dimensions the Devourers couldn't perceive, striking from angles that didn't exist in normal space. "Sir," reported her flight coordinator, "the enemy is trying to analyze our fighter movements, but their sensors can't detect ships that exist partially outside this reality. They're fighting blind." The battle that followed lasted exactly 17 minutes and 13 seconds. Not because the Devourers were weak. Their individual constructs could have destroyed entire solar systems, but because humanity's ancient weapons operated on principles that predated the machine intelligence's understanding of the universe. Lieutenant Misaki Abe monitored the Devourer communications from her position aboard the reconnaissance ship, Shadow. What she heard made her understand the true horror of what humanity had unleashed. "Admiral," she reported, "the enemy is trying to retreat. They're transmitting surrender signals." "Denied," Admiral Kwan replied without hesitation. "We don't take prisoners from extinction-level threats." The final phase of the battle saw weapons that humanity had hoped never to use again. Captain Junho Park watched from Titan Station as the Prometheus-class ships fired their reality anchors, devices that locked local space-time and prevented the Devourers from escaping into other dimensions or timelines. The last Devourer construct tried to activate some kind of emergency protocol, perhaps attempting to scatter its intelligence across multiple realities to preserve itself. Instead, it encountered humanity's ultimate weapon, a device that didn't just destroy targets but erased them so completely that the universe forgot they had ever existed. Dr. Jiho Sato monitored the battle from Earth's command center, watching, as readings showed the complete elimination of the Devourer fleet. "All enemy constructs have been neutralized," he reported. "No survivors, no debris, no trace that they were ever here." As the ancient human fleet began powering down its weapons, Admiral Kwan sent one final transmission to the listening galaxy. Her words were simple but carried the weight of revealed truth. "We are humanity. For 1,000 years we have watched over this galaxy, protecting species that never knew they needed protection. We chose to appear young among you, to let you think you were the elder races. But when extinction came calling, we remembered who we truly are." The massive ships began returning to their hidden berths, disappearing back into the myths and legends, where they had waited patiently for centuries. Within hours, the only evidence of the battle was the empty space where the Devourers had been, and the stunned silence of alien civilizations across the galaxy. Humanity had revealed its true nature, for 17 minutes then chosen to become young again.